So last week we did a hot takes video where I reacted to your Bulls hot takes, and because there really hasn't been much news as it relates to this offseason, not even rumors or speculation, and because I haven't done a mailbag video in what seems like 6 months, I thought what better time than to have one now. So I asked you guys to leave any questions you had regarding the Bulls, and that's what we'll be covering in this video. So what's going on, everyone? You're listening to Bulls Central here. Hope you're all doing well. Of course, if you're new to the channel and looking for more Bulls content for this upcoming season, then be sure to subscribe so you don't miss a video. And I don't know about you guys, despite the Bulls' disappointing season last year, I'm actually looking forward to this upcoming season, and on some hopium that the Bulls will somehow turn things around. Might be a bit delusional on my part, but why go into the season with a negative outlook? Also, real quick, I'm going to be going to Bulls Fest that's happening in a couple weeks, flying out to Chicago specifically for the event, so let me know if any of you guys are attending. Would love to meet some of you in person. But anyway, let's get into some of your guys' questions. Our first one comes to us from Isolate Fan. Do you believe the Bulls will make the playoffs this year? If so, how far will they go? I do actually think the Bulls will make the playoffs this year. I really think with the additions they made in adding shooting, strong, hardworking defenders, also good team players in Carter and Craig. I said this before, but the Bulls lost 17 games last year by 5 points or less, and 8 games alone that they lost by a single possession. And in most of these games, the three-point shot disparity was insane from the amount of threes the Bulls took compared to their opponent. If the Bulls can simply just take a few more threes per game and make them, that can be the difference between being a 40-win team like they were last year or a 45-plus win team going into this season. Now, do I think the additions drastically improve the Bulls? No, I still think they'll likely be a play-in team in the 7 or 8 seed, but they'll make their way in this year. But as far as how far I think they can go, yeah, I still think it's going to be a first-round exit because they're going to be going up against one of the top-seeded teams in the Eastern Conference. I think they can make it a competitive series, but winning it, probably not. Again, this is based on the roster as we know it now. Who knows if any changes will be made by way of a trade either in the next month or so, or before the season starts, or by the trade deadline. Next up, we've got Duncan Helper 48. Do you think the Bulls are underrated going into this season? If anything, we got significantly, maybe too strong a word, better with the additions of Carter and Craig, along with the hopeful increase in play from Coby and Pat, and Lavine also having an injury-free offseason to prepare after finishing this season very strong. I'm not saying we will be the first seed, but I think how people are starting to talk about the Bulls is starting to sound too underrated. Well, a few things to unpack here. One, yeah, I think to an extent the Bulls are going into this season a bit quote-unquote underrated, or maybe not the best word here, maybe you could say underappreciated, in the sense that as of right now the league has very low expectations of the Bulls. After what they saw last season, finishing 10th, missing the playoffs, the team was up and down and overall didn't fit well together. And from an outside viewer's perspective, all they did was add Carter and Craig, and they re-signed Coby and Vuce. Yeah, people are going to rate the Bulls pretty low. I mean, you saw on ESPN, they came out with their first power rankings and had the Bulls 23rd in the league. So while I know some people will say, well, how can you really say the Bulls are underrated? Well, that's why, because I actually think they're going to be better than what most people have them pegged at for their season predictions. But as far as some other points that you mentioned, yeah, saying significantly better with adding Carter and Craig is kind of a stretch. I definitely think the Bulls will be better, all things remaining equal, with Craig and Carter, but I would say it's more marginally better than anything. The other thing you mentioned is that hopeful increase in play from Pat and Coby. I mean, we've been saying this for a couple of seasons now, and we have yet to see a jump in their play. To an extent from Coby last year, but not as much from Patrick Williams. And while I'd like to think we're going to finally see a jump from both of those guys, I won't hold my breath just yet until it happens. Next, we've got Shut Up and Play Club 265. If this team is under 500 by the trade deadline, do you expect major changes at that point? While in theory, yes, I do think the Bulls would start making changes to the overall makeup of the roster, I do think most of the changes, again, assuming the Bulls are below 500, I think most of the changes would come in the offseason after they see how everything shakes out and finishing out the year. If they're below 500 by the deadline, I could see them looking to move DeMar, who would be on an expiring deal, just try to get something for him instead of letting him walk for nothing in free agency, and you might see some additional smaller trades there. But the bulk of the changes, and I mean significant changes, will be made in the offseason if the Bulls continue to struggle. You're talking about potentially trading Lavine and Vucevic as well, maybe even Caruso, who would be going into an expiring deal by next offseason. Lonzo Ball, they may apply for that career player ending exception and get his salary off the books for the final year of his contract. Basically, you would see a teardown if the Bulls are still bad by next offseason. I don't know if we would see that much of a teardown by the trade deadline, though. Next, we've got the G171. What do you see for the future of the Chicago Bulls for the rest of this decade? Do you think they can make it to at least the second round or higher? I mean, you would hope they could at least make it to the second round between now and the end of the decade. Otherwise, boy, are we in for a world of hurt. And I would be surprised to see the current front office still in their role if they weren't able to win a playoff series by now in 2030. But yeah, I mean, as far as what do I see for the future, I honestly don't even know. I mean, the way the NBA works, so much can change so quickly just by hitting on draft picks that end up becoming superstars. Like the Nuggets drafting Jokic in the second round, that would have otherwise been a very minor move, turns out to completely change and shape the trajectory of their franchise. Same with the Bucks and landing Giannis with the 15th pick. So the Bulls, yeah, they could hit on a generational type player in the draft, even if it's not a top pick, and that would put them into contention. Or say Pat, in fact, breaks out into this Kawhi Leonard type player, even though I hate making that comparison. But if he breaks out into this star that the Bulls were hoping he would be, that changes a lot in terms of their future. It also depends on if the Bulls do poorly again this season, they decide to tear everything down and start over and rebuild. How long would the rebuild be? Does it get them back into the playoffs in the next 7 years? Do they win a playoff series? Just so many variables between now and then, but I hope for my own sanity, as well as the sanity for all those other diehard Bulls fans out there, that they would at least make it to the second round of the playoffs between now and the end of the decade. And that really isn't that hard to do when you talk about it being over the course of multiple seasons. Next, we've got Fen Moods. Would you rather replace Billy Donovan with a coach that can maximize the current Bulls roster's potential, or get a roster that fits Billy Donovan's coaching? This is a hard one, partially because I've never been a fan of Billy Donovan. This even goes back to his days when he was with OKC, and part of it is that I'm kind of biased and that I've always been of the opinion that most great college coaches don't make for good NBA coaches. And while Billy Donovan has had some success at the NBA level, it also helped that he did so in having superstars on his roster like Kevin Durant, Russell Westbrook, Paul George. And even then, aside from that first year with Kevin Durant, his teams never really made it that far. And then the problem with getting a roster that fits Billy Donovan's coaching style, I don't necessarily like that, because Donovan is actually at his best with a younger, more rebuilding type of roster that has low expectations. Kind of like that last year with OKC when they traded Paul George and Westbrook, and then the thought was that they were going to be one of the worst teams in the league, but with Chris Paul and a bunch of young players, they actually exceeded expectations, ended up as a winning team and finished 5th in the West and gave the Rockets a hard-fought series in the bubble. So if you're going the route of getting a roster that best fits Donovan's coaching style, it would mean a young, rebuilding team that is in need of development. I don't really want that either. I'd rather just get rid of Billy Donovan at that point. Next, we've got Cam101077. If you could make the best Bulls team in history, which players would you have on it for each position? Thanks for all your vids and hype for the season. Well, I appreciate you, Cam, and thanks for always tuning in. The question is pretty easy for me if we're just talking about the starting lineup, but if we're wanting more like a full all-time 12-man roster, that changes things a bit. For the starting lineup, again, we're going to assume all players are in their primes, or I guess I should say at their best when they were with the Bulls, because Dwayne Wade, as an example, was not in his prime with the Bulls. But a starting lineup is easy. I've got Derrick Rose at point, Michael Jordan, of course, at the 2, Scottie Pippen at the 3. I don't see how you can't go with Rodman at power forward, even though Horace Grant was great as well. Then I would take Noah at center, even though I know a lot of people would take Artis Gilmore there. But coming off the bench, I would have Gilmore as the backup 5 behind Noah. Horace Grant at power forward, I would probably do DeMar DeRozan at small forward. Then I would probably take Butler at the 2 behind Michael Jordan. Backup point guard, I think I gotta go with Kirk Hinrich. And then if we're doing a full 12-man roster, 2 additional players, probably Tony Kukoc and Zach Lavine. I'd love to turn that question around to you guys, though. Who would you guys take for a full all-time 12-man roster? Let me know in the comments on that one. Let's do one more, and this one comes to us from DubSoapP. Are the Bulls going to be mediocre forever as long as the Reinsdorfs own the team? The only way I can see us becoming contenders is if we get a Luka Giannis type of player, but with the Bulls drafting history, we know that won't happen. Well, the Bulls drafting history hasn't been that bad. Yeah, they've missed out on picks, but so have a lot of teams throughout history. They did draft a generational talent in Derrick Rose, just unfortunate that he got injured. And of course, they drafted the greatest player of all time, although that was the year before the Reinsdorfs bought the team, if I'm not mistaken. But as far as your question, are the Bulls going to be mediocre forever with the Reinsdorfs? I mean, the challenge is the Bulls are going to, for the most part, be mediocre of a team when the owners refuse to pay the luxury tax. In order to be a title contending team, you have to pay the tax. It's very rare in the last 20 years of the NBA for the teams that won the championship to not have paid the tax. And the other issue is the Reinsdorfs, they don't mind being mid, because they still make a ton of money from this franchise because of everything Michael Jordan has built in making their team a global brand with a strong, loyal following. Now, the Reinsdorfs have said they are willing to go into the luxury tax if they feel they have a team that has a chance at winning a title. So if the Bulls were to get there, then yes, there is a world where the Bulls could be good and be a title team under the Reinsdorfs. But because of their history and spending habits, it's going to be more often than not that the Bulls will be mediocre in a given season while that family still owns the team. But anyway, I'll end it there, guys. Let me know how you guys would have answered some of these questions below in the comments. As always, be sure to subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.